She was 19 and homeless. No family she could call, no money in the bank, just a duffel bag and $10 she had folded in a sock since February. And with that $10, she bought an abandoned stilt house standing in 4 feet of water half a mile off the Alabama coast, in a bay so shallow the boats have to know where the channel is. The pilings were furred with barnacles. The roof was half gone. The county said the structure was a hazard to navigation and had been trying to make somebody remove it since 2009. But what nobody knew was that under the deck of that old camp house, slung in a cradle between the pilings where it had hung for 41 years, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Josie Ballard had been living close to water her whole life without ever getting to be on it. She grew up in Bayou La Batre, which is a shrimping town on the Alabama Gulf Coast, and her mother worked the picking line at a seafood house for 11 years until her hands gave out. There was no father in the picture, and Josie has never made a story out of that. He left when she was 4. She does not remember him, and you cannot miss something you never had. Her mother died in September. The trailer they rented went back to the man who owned it in November. By February, Josie was sleeping in the back of a friend's Silverado in a church car park. She had one friend with a truck, a laundromat card, and a job at a gas station on Highway 188. Between the 3 of those, she got from September to February without asking anybody for anything. The Stilt house came up because of a man named Alton Keel, who is 78 years old and has run the bait stand at Coden Landing since 1979. He knew her mother. He had sold her mother bait for 30 years and watched Josie grow up standing on that dock. When he saw her sleeping in a truck in a car park, he did the only thing a man like that ever does. He made it sound like she would be doing him a favor. He told her the county was going to burn the toller camp or barge it off, and that somebody ought to buy it first, and that the paper said the minimum bid was $10. What he did not tell her was that he had gone down to the courthouse the week before and asked what the minimum was. He came at it sideways on the dock in February, a coffee in each hand. There's a camp out at Portersville the county's fixing to burn. So somebody ought to buy it before they do. Alton Keel handed her one of the coffees. Minimum bid's $10. I can't hold 2 places. You don't have 2 places. Well, he said, not yet. Josie knew exactly what he was doing and let him do it. She has thanked him once, and he changed the subject so fast she has never tried again. There are, or were, about 400 camp houses standing in the shallow water along that stretch of the Alabama coast. They are not houses in the way a person from anywhere else understands the word. They are 1 or 2 rooms on pilings driven into the bay bottom, 12 or 14 feet above the water, reached only by boat. Fishermen built them from the 1920s onward. You went out on a Friday, you fished, you slept over the water, and you came back Sunday. There is no power, and there is no water, and there never was. What there is a bay that goes pink at 6 in the morning and a floor that is nothing but sky underneath it. Hurricane Frederick took about half of them in 1979. Katrina took most of what was left in 2005. The ones still standing are standing because somebody kept rebuilding them, and every year there are fewer. The Toller camp is 2 rooms and a screened porch on 11 cypress pilings, half a mile off the marsh at the mouth of Portersville Bay. Portersville Bay is a shallow arm of Mississippi Sound on the western side of Mobile Bay, and it is oyster and shrimp water. It is bounded by marsh on the north and by barrier islands a long way south, and there is nothing on it taller than a camp house. The bottom is soft gray mud over sand. The water runs 18 inches to 5 feet across most of it, and the channels are unmarked, which is why almost nobody who did not grow up there goes out on it. Bayou La Batre calls itself the seafood capital of Alabama, and it is a working town, not a resort. Shrimp boats, a boat works, 3 processing houses, and a lot of people who have been doing one of those 4 things for 4 generations. The Vietnamese families came in the late 70s, and now about a third of the fleet is theirs, and the town has absorbed that the way working towns do, which is completely and without much comment. That is the country this happens in. It is not scenic in the way people mean when they say scenic. It is flat, it is hot, it smells of low tide, and the light on that water in the evening is the best thing Josie Ballard has ever seen. She went out to it for the first time on a Tuesday in March in Alton Keel's skiff, with a duffel bag and a 5-gallon jug of water. The water in that bay is 4 feet deep and the color of weak tea. You can see the bottom the whole way out. The camp came up out of the haze at about 200 yards, and from that distance, she thought it was floating. It is not floating. It is standing. And once you are under it, you understand the difference, because there are 11 cypress trunks going down into the mud, and they have been there since 1948. Alton tied up at the ladder and did not come up. The stairs were hers now, he told her, and he would wait. She was up there about 20 minutes before she said anything down to him. There's no roof on half of it. I know it. There's a lamp on the wall with oil still in it. Alton Keel was quiet for a second. That'd be Wendell's. The deck is 20 by 30, and the boards are cypress, and they had gone silver. Half the roof was open to the sky. Inside there was a bed frame with no mattress, a 2-burner stove with the propane long gone, a table, 2 chairs, and a wall of shelves with nothing on them. There was a hurricane lamp on a nail, and it still had oil in it. Josie stood in the middle of that floor and could hear water underneath her, which is the whole reason she stayed. She slept there that first night with no roof over half the room, and she did not sleep much, and she was not frightened. The sound is the thing nobody warns you about. A camp house at night is not quiet. Water moves under the floor all night, and it does not do it evenly. It slaps, then it is silent, then it slaps twice. Something knocks a piling. A mullet jumps. The tin on the roof ticks as it cools. And under all of it there is the low continuous noise of a bay, which is not waves, because there are no waves in 18 inches of water. It is a kind of breathing. It was the first time in 5 months that nobody could come and tell her to move. The Toller camp was built in 1948 by a man named Wendell Tolar, who worked 41 years at the Bayou La Batre Boat Works, and who died in 1994. Alton Keel knew him. Everybody at that landing knew him. He was, by every account, an ordinary man who fished on the weekends and did not say much, and kept his camp better than anybody else on that stretch of water. He had a wife called Ruth and a daughter called Josephine. Josephine Toller drowned in Portersville Bay in the summer of 1961. She was 19 years old. The boat she was in went over in a squall about a mile east of the camp, and they found her the next morning. Alton Keel was 14 that summer, and he was on the dock when they brought her in. He has never in 64 years talked about that to anybody. He did not talk about it to Josie until August. What Wendell Toller did after that is what this story is about, and nobody living knew he had done it until a 19-year-old girl went under her own house with a flashlight in April. She went under the camp in April because of a sound. At low tide, with the wind out of the south, there was a knock, not the slap of water on a piling. A dull wooden knock, once every few seconds, coming from somewhere below the deck boards. She had been hearing it for 3 weeks and had decided it was a log caught in the pilings. On the 4th of April, she went down the ladder at low water in a pair of waders with a flashlight. She stood in 18 inches of water in the dark under her own floor and looked up. The underside of a camp house is a forest. 11 pilings, a grid of cypress joists, 40 years of oyster shell and barnacle, and light coming down in stripes through the gaps in the boards. And slung between 2 of the joists, in a cradle of rope and cypress cleats, 8 feet above the water, was a boat. 16 feet of it. Upside down, hull up, the bottom furred with dust and spiderweb and completely dry. It had been hanging there so long that the rope had bedded into the wood. Her first thought was that somebody had stored it there and forgotten it, which is a normal thing to happen under a camp house. Her second thought, about a minute later, was that nobody stores a boat 8 feet up in a purpose-built cradle. You lay it on the beams, or you tie it off. Somebody had built a cradle. Josie Ballard stood in the water under her house and looked at the bottom of a boat for what she estimates was 10 minutes before she went back up the ladder and sat on the deck. It took her and Alton Keel and 2 of his nephews the better part of a Saturday to get it down. You cannot lower a boat out of a cradle in a tidal bay by yourself. What they did was cut the old rope, take the weight on 2 slings, and walk it down the joists at slack water onto a pair of floating drums. It came out into the light for the first time since the Reagan administration. It is a Gulf Coast skiff, 16 feet, built of cypress with an oak stem and copper rivets. Flat bottom, flared sides, a bench thwart, and a small foredeck. That hull shape is particular to those waters. Flat bottom because the bay is 18 inches deep in places, and you have to be able to sit on the mud. Flared sides so a chop cannot come over. It is not a beautiful design in a magazine sense. It is the shape 4 generations of that coast arrived at, and it is exactly right for the 2 miles of water it was built for. It is finished. Not roughed out, not half done. Sanded, caulked, primed, and painted a pale gray green that has not faded because it has never seen the sun. The oarlocks are bronze, and they were bought new. The rope in the cradle was new when it went up. That detail is the one Alton Keel keeps returning to. A man who is grieving does not go and buy new bronze oarlocks. He uses what is in the shed. Wendell Toller bought hardware. He went to a chandlery and paid money for the good fittings, for a boat he had already decided nobody was going to row, and it has never been in the water. Alton Keel went over every inch of that hull looking for the marks a boat gets in its first season, and there are none. On the transom, in white paint, in a careful hand, is one word. Josephine. There was a tin box wedged under the foredeck, wrapped in oilcloth, and it is the reason any of this can be told. Inside it is a build log, not a diary, a workman's log, in pencil, in a lined notebook, and it runs from the 11th of March 1962 to the 2nd of September 1966. Every entry is a date, the hours worked, and what was done. Lofted stem pattern, 3 hours. Steamed and hung first plank, 5 hours. Sanded, 2 hours. There are 411 entries, and the last one says, finished her. Josephine Toller drowned in July of 1961. Her father started building a boat for her 8 months later, and it took him 4.5 years. He never put it in the water. When it was done, he built a cradle under the camp and hung it up. He went on fishing off that deck for another 28 years, and every time he climbed that ladder, he climbed past it. Ruth Toller died in 1988. Wendell died in 1994. Neither of them ever told a living soul about the boat, and Alton Keel, who tied up at that camp 200 times, never once looked up. The name is a coincidence, and Josie has been careful about it from the first week. Josephine is a common name on that coast, and it was more common in 1942 when Josephine Tolar was born. Josie Ballard is Josie on her birth certificate, and always has been. More than once, and to more than one person, she has been plain that she is not going to pretend the boat was waiting for her. It was not. It was waiting for a girl who died in 1961. What she will allow is this. She went down a ladder into the dark under a house she had owned for 6 weeks and found a boat with her own name on the back of it. A person can know a thing is a coincidence and still have to sit down. Alton Keel was the one with the useful thing to offer about it, 3 days later on the dock. Wendell Toller built that boat for somebody who was never going to use it, and that is the whole of what he did. If it turned out 60 years later that it fit somebody, that was not a message from anywhere. It is just what happens when a man builds something properly and does not throw it away. Then he said that she should put it in the water, and that if she did not, he was going to. I don't know how to row. You'll learn in an afternoon. Everybody does. It's 60 years old. It's 4 days old. It's just been sitting 60 years, waiting to be 4 days old. The other thing in the tin box is what turned a $10 shack into something she can keep. Under the log there is a folded sheet of onion skin paper, stamped, and it is the original riparian lease from the state of Alabama, dated 1948, in the name of Wendell J. Tolar. Alabama does not sell the bottom of the bay. What a camp house owner has is a lease on the water bottom under his pilings, and without one the structure is exactly what the county said it was, which is an obstruction. The county had been trying to remove the Tolar camp since 2009 because the lease had lapsed and there was no record of it. There was a record of it. It was in a tin box under a boat under the floor. A lawyer in Bayou La Batre named Corinne Dabney took the file in May and did not charge her. The lease was reinstated in August. On the strength of that piece of paper and a chain of title, a man at the courthouse rebuilt out of index cards. That is the practical version of what was under that deck. A 19-year-old with $10 and a duffel bag now holds a state water bottom lease first issued in 1948. Corinne Dabney has been through it with her twice, and Josie still finds it hard to hold in her head. A water bottom lease on Portersville Bay cannot be newly issued. The state stopped granting them for recreational camps decades ago. The only ones that exist are the ones that already existed, and they run with the structure. So the $10 shack is worth what somebody will pay for the right to have a building standing in that water, which is not nothing, and which she has no intention of finding out. The camp is not an obstruction. It is a permitted structure, and it is hers. Alton Keel talked about 1961 in August, on the deck, after they had put the boat in the water. He was 14. He was on the dock at Coden Landing when the boats came in the next morning. He saw what a bay does to a person overnight, and he has carried that since 1961 without ever once putting it into words. What he said was short. Wendell Tolar did not shout and did not cry on that dock. The man stood there with his hat in his hands, and then he went home, and a week later he was back out on the water, and everybody in that town called him strong. Then came the thing Josie wrote down that night on the back of the build log. He said, he wasn't strong. He was building a boat. Josie put it to him, why had he never gone up to it? 200 trips out to that camp, and never once a light up into the joists. Because he didn't want me to. He never said that. He didn't have to. Alton Keel looked out at the water a while. A man hangs something under his own floor, you leave it there. For 4.5 years, every weekend, in a shed behind a house in Bayou La Batre, a man who had lost his daughter in the water built her a boat to be safe in. Then he hung it under his camp where he could climb past it, and he never explained that to anybody, and he took it to his grave in 1994. Alton Keel is the last person alive who was standing on that dock in 1961, and he found out about the boat from a girl who was not born until 2006. If you're enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep making stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, is there something someone in your family made that you only found out about later? They put it in the water on the 9th of August at slack tide, off the ladder, with 4 people and a lot of rope. A wooden boat that has been dry for 41 years does not float. The seams open as the planks shrink, and you have to sink it deliberately in shallow water and let the wood take up for 3 or 4 days before it will hold. So they sank the Josephine in 3 feet of water beside the pilings and left her there. Alton Keel came out twice a day to look at her. That is the only time in 18 months she has seen him hurry. On the 4th morning the seams had swelled shut, and they bailed her out, and she came up, and she floated level, and she did not leak. A boat built in a shed in 1966 by a man who never launched it, floating on Portersville Bay in 2026, half a mile off the marsh. Under the camp he built her cradle in. Josie rode her that evening for about 40 minutes and did not go anywhere in particular. Now the part that is not comfortable, and Josie puts it in front of people rather than letting them find it. A camp house is not a solution to being homeless. It is a 2-room building on 11 pilings in a hurricane zone, with no power, no water, no septic, and no insurance available at any price. Everything she has comes out to her in a John boat. Water in 5-gallon jugs, propane in 20-pound bottles, food for 4 days at a time. The run-in from Coden Landing is 25 minutes at low speed, and you cannot do it in the dark unless you know the channel, which she now does and did not in March. Weather closes it. 3 or 4 times a winter the bay gets too rough for a 14-foot John boat, and she stays where she is until it lays down. There is a solar panel and a marine battery now, which runs a light and charges a phone and nothing else. The roof cost her $1,100 in materials, and she and Alton and his nephews did the labor over 3 weekends in June. 6 of the 11 pilings need sistering. That is $9,000 if a marine contractor does it, and she has priced it 3 times, hoping the number would change. And every June the season starts. A camp house in Portersville Bay is a building that has to be lucky every year, and the ones still standing are the ones that have been lucky and rebuilt and lucky again. She works at a marina office in Coden now, 32 hours at $14 an hour, which Alton Keel arranged and denies arranging. She is not saving $9,000 on that. She knows it. The insurance question is the one people ask, and there is no good answer to it. You cannot insure a camp house. No carrier in Alabama will write a policy on a structure over water with no road access in a hurricane zone, and none has for about 20 years. So the entire thing is uninsured, permanently. And every camp owner on that bay knows that the building is a bet against the Gulf. Josie has done the arithmetic and come out the other side of it. What she says is that a trailer in Bayou La Batre is also a bet against the Gulf, and it costs $700 a month. She has a plan for the season, and it is the same plan every camp owner on that bay has. Hurricane season on that coast runs the 1st of June to the end of November, which is half the year. When a storm is called, you take out what matters, and you tie down what does not. The build log goes in a waterproof case in the truck. The Josephine comes off the mooring and goes up a bayou behind the marsh, where 4 generations of that town have put boats. And then you drive inland, and you wait. And when it is over, you come back and you find out. Alton Keel has done that 11 times. He has lost a camp twice and rebuilt it twice. The second time was Katrina, and he was 62. He put it back the following spring with 3 nephews and a borrowed pile driver, and he has never once described that as difficult. The offers came in October after somebody at the courthouse mentioned the lease to somebody else. A man from Mobile offered her $6,000 for the skiff. He came out to look at her on a Saturday and spent 2 hours on his knees on the deck with a torch, and he was decent about all of it. He restores Gulf Coast working boats, and he was straight about what he had and what it was worth, and $6,000 is a fair number for a hand-built Cypress skiff in that condition. $6,000 is 2/3 of the pilings. She turned it down in about 4 seconds and has spent longer than that explaining why, mostly to herself. What she has arrived at is that the boat is not the valuable thing in that box. The lease is the valuable thing. The boat is the reason the lease was still there. A museum in Mobile asked to borrow the build log, and she agreed, on the condition that it comes back. It is being scanned now, so the whole 4.5 years of it will be readable by anybody. That costs nothing, and it is the only part of this that is finished. There is one more thing in the build log, and Josie did not find it until October, going through it with the museum scanner running. The entries run from March 1962 to September 1966, and they are all in the same pencil and the same hand, except the last page. After finished her, on the 2nd of September 1966, There is nothing for 22 years. Then, on a page near the back, in ink, in a hand gone shaky, there are 11 more lines. They are dated between 1988 and 1994, which is the 6 years between Ruth Toller's death and Wendell's. They are not about the boat. Each one is a date and a few words about the weather and the water. Wind swow, bay flat, mullet running by the point. Cold, no fish, stayed anyway. Rain all day, read, 11 entries in 6 years. A man in his 70s alone on a camp house, writing 3 or 4 words about the day into the back of his dead daughter's boat log, because it was the notebook that was out there. The last one is dated the 9th of October, 1993, 10 months before he died. And it says, "Still here." Josie read those 11 lines with a museum technician standing beside her and had to go out onto the deck. What gets her about them is not that they are sad, it is that they are ordinary. A man wrote down the wind and the fish in the back of a notebook he had used to build a boat for a girl who died at 19. He did it 11 times in 6 years. Then he stopped. And then he died. Nobody was ever meant to read them. They are not addressed to anybody. They are just a man noting that the bay was flat and the mullet were running by the point. The entry she cannot get past is the one that says, "Cold, no fish, stayed anyway." What is happening now is small and slow, and she does not oversell it. The Josephine is on a mooring off the ladder. Josie rows her most evenings, and she has not put a motor on her and does not intend to. Alton Keel comes out on Thursdays. He is 78, and he does not climb the ladder as well as he did in March, and neither of them has said anything about that. He taught her to scull with one oar over the transom, which is how everybody on that bay used to move a skiff, and which almost nobody can do now. She has been sistering the pilings herself, one at a time, with pressure-treated timber and galvanized bolts and a borrowed hydraulic jack. It is not the $9,000 job, and it is not nothing. She has done 2. Alton Keel will not let her do that part alone and comes out whether she asks or not. The work happens at low tide, standing in the mud, and there is a window of about 3 hours. You set the new timber against the old piling, jack it, and through-bolt it in 4 places. It is cold, awkward, filthy work, and it is the most satisfied she has ever been with anything. 2 pilings down, 4 to go, and she has worked out that at her rate it is 3 more years. The 2 she has done are the outer pair on the southwest corner, which is the corner a storm hits first. That was not her idea either. Alton walked the deck in June with a level and a piece of chalk and marked the 2 he wanted done first, and then he did not mention it again until she had a jack. Alton Keel is 78. She has worked that out too and does not talk about it. The build log is coming back from Mobile in the spring. The museum wanted to keep it and made a fair case. It is a complete record of a wooden boat being built by hand over 4.5 years by a man with no training, and there are very few of those anywhere. Josie's answer was that it can be scanned, photographed, transcribed, and published, and that the notebook itself is going back on the shelf in the room it was written for, and on the shelf inside, on the wall where there was nothing when she got there, is the hurricane lamp that was hanging on a nail in March. It still has the same oil in it. She has never lit it. It sits on the same nail. The wick is still the wick Wendell Toller last trimmed. Alton raised it in November, and it is the only time he has put a direct question to her about any of it. "You going to burn that oil?" "Not yet." "It's 40-year-old oil. It'll burn. I know it." "Not yet." There is a thing that happens on that bay about 20 minutes before the sun comes up, when the water goes the same color as the sky and the line between them stops existing. You cannot see it from the shore. You have to be out on it, and you have to have slept out there, because it lasts about 4 minutes and there is no way to drive to it in time. Wendell Tolar saw that 4,000 times. Josephine Tolar saw it as a child on her father's boat. And now a 19-year-old who spent 5 months sleeping in the back of a truck in a church car park sees it out of a doorway she owns. That is what a camp house is. It is not a building. It is a floor in the middle of the water with a roof over it, and it exists so that somebody can be there at 4 minutes to 6. Josie Ballard was 19 years old and homeless. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on an abandoned stilt house standing in 4 feet of water off the coast of Alabama. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what is something a person in your family made or kept that you did not find out about until years later? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.